CNN's Evan Perez joins us now. So, Evan, this is getting really, really messy. What more can you tell us about these documents found at the former vice president's home?
Yeah, Victor and Bianna, this is very messy, especially for the vice president and everyone who's been handling these classified documents. The vice president's team was doing these searches out of an abundance of caution, in part because of what they had seen develop in the case of the President Biden and the documents that have been discovered not only at the Penn Biden Center, but also at his home. And they did these searches last week. They uncovered about a dozen documents, which they then immediately reached out to the National Archives to alert. They found documents that they thought might be also Presidential Records Act responsive documents. And so that's how this all got started. At about 9:30 p.m. last Thursday is when the FBI came to the former vice president's home in Carmel, Indiana, and took possession of these documents, about a dozen documents, as you pointed out, that have classification markings. Now, we don't know very much about the documents. We don't know what specifically they entail, the level of classification, but this is something that is now becoming a spiraling issue for the government, for the Justice Department, which is doing a review of this to see what these are, who owns this information, which intelligence agency owns this information, and to see whether there's been any damage done to national security. This is part of the standard process that happens when these documents are found in places that they're not supposed to be. Now, what we know now is that in addition to these classified documents, the vice president's team, the former vice president's team, has turned over 4 boxes of documents. They arrived here in Washington just yesterday, handed over to the National Archives. Again, this is just early in the process. We don't know whether the FBI and the Justice Department will need to investigate further, whether there are any other places and any other documents that could be missing. Victor,
all right,
Bianna?
Evan, we're going to expand the conversation in just a moment. We want you to be part of it. But first, let's go to the White House. We know that we may hear from President Biden on this news concerning classified documents found at former President Pence's private home in Indiana. The president is meeting right now with Democratic congressional leaders at the White House. Let's bring in CNN's Phil Mattingly. So the stories of mishandling, misplacing documents have been dogging the president. How's the White House now reacting to this?
You know, Victor, publicly, the White House is not commenting at all, making clear that this is an ongoing matter and they're not going to weigh in one way or the other. Privately, they are very cognizant of what's been happening over the course of the last several hours. And I think when you talk to people inside the White House, they recognize that there is a political element here in terms of having another example of the situation that has really kind of consumed the president and the presidency over the course of the last several weeks. One from a Republican vice president in this case that shows very clear parallels. And two, I think there's a sense that for Republicans that have been attacking the president and his actions while he was vice president or in the wake of his vice presidency on Capitol Hill, now they have to look at one of their own doing the same exact thing. And I think probably more broadly, look, White House officials, again, not weighing in publicly, making very clear that they don't want any part of an ongoing matter here. But they recognize the political salience here and the idea that when you compare 2 different vice presidents leaving, both of whom have said that they had no knowledge that these classified documents were in their possession or had been transferred to their property, those parallels are important to try and underscore, I think, a point that President Biden has been making over the course of the last couple of weeks. Now, how this plays out going forward obviously is an open question. But again, for a White House that has been dealing with this in isolation, for the most part, trying to draw a contrast between their predecessor, former President Donald Trump, this certainly is an example that very much aligns with how they've operated up to this point, which once again draws the contrast that they want to point out very regularly with where the former president has been on this.
All right, Phil Mattingly, stay with us. Meantime, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are now reacting to this discovery of classified documents at Mike Pence's home. For more on this, let's bring in CNN's Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. So, Manu, what has the reaction been thus far?
Well, a lot of members are stunned. They really are at a loss at how this is continually happening and wanting to get information. There's some questions that will be directed directly to the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, tomorrow when she appears behind closed doors with the Senate Intelligence Committee. They have been asking for questions ever since it was revealed last year that Donald Trump had records at Mar-a-Lago. They renewed the requests of Biden leaders, Republican and Democratic leaders of that committee when it came to light that Biden had these documents, and now they're renewing that request again again in the light of this aftermath with Mike Pence coming to light. And Marco Rubio, one of those leaders of the committee, said this will definitely come up tomorrow behind closed doors. But there's also questions about what else Congress can do and how these records appeared at Joe Biden's home, even records from the time as a senator, questions about how that emerged. I had a chance just to ask Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer about specifically what Congress should do about this in light of these concerns and in light of the fact that this keeps happening. Given that we have learned about Mike Pence having these documents, is it not incumbent on the Senate to investigate, to have some sort of oversight to ensure that the nation's secrets aren't being leaked out everywhere in people's private homes?
Senator Peters is looking at bipartisan legislation in terms of classified documents. I support his efforts. In the meantime, on the specific cases, the appropriate thing to do is have special prosecutor, and that's what's happening.
So Schumer's referring to an effort that was happening in the Homeland Security Committee led by Gary Peters, the chairman of that committee, to try to change, overhaul record-keeping laws, federal record-keeping laws. That effort is still taking shape, still coming to light. We'll see if it actually comes to pass. But lawmakers really at the moment trying to figure out exactly what happened here. Calls for an investigation on the Senate side. And, of course, the House Republicans already investigating what Joe Biden has done. We'll see how they press forward on the Pence matter as well.
All right, Manu, stay with us. We have also Phil, and we have Evan with us. And let's add Josh School. He's a former FBI Executive Assistant Director for Intelligence. Josh, to you, whatever system there is at the White House, at the Vice President's residence, obviously is not working well. The former Vice President and the President say they didn't know about these documents. Their lawyers discovered them. They handed them over. Trump's a different story. But is there a simple, easy fix so that this doesn't continue to happen?
Well, Victor, I'm not sure there's a simple fix for this, but clearly what's going on across both administrations is the fact that the policies and procedures in the White House are not effective. It looks like that most of this is happening during transition and a rush to get out of the White House. I would call on the Director of National Intelligence to do a review to see what policies are in place, what else needs to be in place, and really do a holistic look to make sure that this is not continuing to happen.
So, Evan, are we in a scenario now where you have the Clintons and the Bushes and perhaps the Cheneys now scrambling through their private homes to see if they inadvertently have some classified material of their own? I mean, because these things we keep getting these headlines every few days. I would be shocked if it was just limited to just two administrations at this point.
Right, exactly. I think that's the big concern. At this point, we know that, this happens from time to time. People find documents. Sometimes someone passes away and a spouse is going through their belongings and comes across something that no one knew was there. And so this happens from time to time. But the discovery of these documents, or rather the legal fight and the protracted litigation between Donald Trump and the National Archives and the Justice Department has really kind of changed the way everyone approaches these things. And this is why, Vice President Pence's team didn't really take any action after the Trump situation, because they just thought that was a complete outlier. It's after this happened with Joe Biden, that they decided to do this search. And it does raise some important questions that I think you guys are trying to get at. And I think we don't really know until people, do these searches to see whether there's anything missing. I think, it's going to be a work in progress.
Phil, we've heard from former President Trump on his social media about this Mike Pence discovery. And of course, we know the history between these two up to and since January 6th. And former President Trump said Mike Pence is an innocent man. He never did anything knowingly dishonest in his life. I wonder your thoughts on if these discoveries at Pence's home and who Pence is and what the country knows about Mike Pence shifts this conversation from a criminal exclusive to how do we fix the system, and not just, were these men trying to use these for some nefarious purposes?
I think it's important to separate what the former president has done when it comes to these documents and his efforts to shield some of those documents or not give them back, and where the two vice presidents, the former vice president and now the current president, Joe Biden, have been on these specific issues. However, I think when you look at the comparative, if you separate the former president from this, if you look at the parallels between the current president and Vice President Pence from both of their times transitioning out of the vice presidency, I think what Manu's reporting has been throughout the course of this day, not just in his conversation with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, but also with the other lawmakers that he's sent in to our operation, his Hill colleagues have as well, it seems, or at least appears at this initial moment, and keep in mind, people were pretty stunned throughout the course of this day when this news came out, that that's the direction things are headed. Now, to be very clear, there is still a special counsel investigation, and there were still new discoveries of documents in the president's home just a couple of days ago during a search by the FBI. But I think this is a moment right now where I think people are grasping the fact that this is a broader issue, one that's always existed in Washington over the course, certainly of the last couple of decades. But when it comes to this transition process, and perhaps there needs to be legislative fixes, perhaps there needs to be fixes from the intelligence community here, not necessarily a central focus or an isolated focus on the investigation itself.